The stars above the barren moon twinkled softly, their cold light illuminating the crumbling remains of a once proud palace. Beneath that starry canopy stood a human mechanic, hands stained with oil and dirt, as he gazed up at the alien emperor's offer, a gift that was meant to be an insult, yet meant more to him than he could ever explain. What would the mechanic do when faced with the gift of an obese princess, destined to live in the shadows of her father's cruelty? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this that mix honor, strength, and unexpected tenderness move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. The air buzzed with a quiet tension in the grand hall of the alien palace, its vastness amplified by the towering obsidian columns that lined the walls. Victor wiped his brow with the back of his hand, the oily grime from his mechanical work stubborn against his skin. He had never been one for high society, preferring the steady hum of machines and the simplicity of gears and pulleys. Yet here he stood, dressed in the garb of a palace mechanic, surrounded by the glistening extravagance of alien nobility. A part of him felt like an intruder in their world, a world where power flowed through bloodlines and respect was earned through birthright rather than action. He adjusted his tool belt, watching as the emperor of the Harshal Empire, a towering alien with translucent skin and eyes that shimmered like stars, made his way across the polished floor. Behind him, the emperor's daughter, Princess Althea, trailed reluctantly, her movements stiff, her green skin the color of moss beneath a thick layer of fabric. "Victor, my friend," the emperor boomed, his voice a deep rumble that filled the hall. "I present to you my daughter, the greatest of gifts." Victor stiffened. He had heard rumors about the princess, whispers among the workers that she was too large, too slow, too unlike the perfect creatures of the Harshal Empire. They called her the obese one behind her back, a cruel nickname that masked the reality of a young woman trapped in her father's shadow. The emperor's words cut through the air, heavy with the weight of insult, though Victor could tell that no one else in the room seemed to notice. Althea's face was a mask of quiet resignation, her eyes downcast as she stood beside her father, awkwardly shifting her weight from foot to foot. Victor could sense her discomfort, the way her shoulders slumped under the weight of unwanted attention. To the emperor, she was nothing more than a pawn, a tool to wield in his endless games of power. To Victor, she was something else, a person, not just a figure to be discarded when the time came. As the emperor gestured grandly toward Althea, Victor couldn't help but notice the way her gaze flickered up to him for just a moment, as though searching for some sign of recognition, some hint that she wasn't invisible. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the quiet plea for something more than what she had been given. And in that brief moment, Victor made a choice. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Victor said, his voice steady as he bowed slightly to the emperor, though his gaze never left Althea. "Your daughter is indeed a gift. I will see that she is well taken care of." The emperor smiled, a slow, calculating grin. "See that you do," he said, turning on his heel to leave the room, confident that his words had landed as intended. But as the crowd began to disperse, Victor stayed where he was, his hands tucked into his pockets as he watched Althea for a moment longer. She was not the insult her father believed her to be. Victor had seen enough in her eyes to know that. He had seen enough to know that she was something worth fighting for, and perhaps, for the first time in his life, Victor understood that the greatest strength didn't lie in power or position. It lay in the quiet moments of defiance, the ones that no one saw but that could change everything. The days after Victor's brief meeting with Princess Althea passed slowly. He spent his time amidst the hum of the palace machinery, each turn of his wrench a quiet rhythm that kept him grounded. The world of the alien nobles felt distant, like a dream he could never fully step into. But every now and then, his thoughts drifted back to the princess, her eyes filled with something far deeper than the royal disdain she faced. A few days after the emperor's public presentation of Althea, she appeared in the workshop. Her steps were careful, almost hesitant, as she moved past rows of machines, her fingers lightly brushing against their cold metal surfaces. The workers didn't acknowledge her presence. To them, she was just another royal figure to ignore, a symbol of the emperor's cruelty that no one dared speak of. But Victor saw her. He noticed the way she walked, her gaze darting nervously, as if anticipating mockery. It was clear that she wasn't used to being here where there was no throne, no court to judge her. "Can I help you, princess?" Victor asked, his voice breaking the silence. Althea froze, as if his words caught her off guard. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for a brief moment, Victor saw a flash of vulnerability in them. I don't know," she replied softly. "I was just looking." Victor nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looking at what?" "I don't know. Everything, I suppose." She glanced around, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's different here. The machines don't judge." Her words lingered between them, and Victor understood. The machines didn't care about appearances, didn't care about size, bloodlines, or titles. They simply existed to function, to be. He felt a flicker of understanding stir in him. Althea had become like one of these machines, ignored, dismissed, trapped in a world that couldn't see her. "I know the feeling," Victor said, his voice quiet. "When you're not what they want, it's easy to feel invisible." Althea met his gaze, her eyes softening. "Yes, exactly. I'm tired of being invisible." Victor felt something shift within him. She wasn't just the obese daughter the court had condemned her to be. She was a person, a woman trapped in a system that valued her only for her position, not her worth. "I'm Victor," he said, offering his hand. "I fix things, not one for titles, but if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm your guy." Althea hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. Her grip was gentle, but there was something genuine about it. "I don't need help," she said, smiling faintly, "but I think I'd like to talk." And with that simple gesture, a quiet bond began to form between them, one that neither would realize would change everything. Victor continued his work in the palace, but his thoughts often returned to Althea. Each day, she would appear in the workshop, her presence as quiet as the machines she admired. Sometimes, she'd sit in the corner, watching him work, the silence between them comfortable, unspoken. The rumors about the princess swirled around the palace like a thick fog, whispers that she was too large, too slow, too unworthy of her position. The emperor had made it clear that she was nothing more than an obstacle in the path of his rule, but Victor saw her differently. He could see the intelligence in her eyes, the sharpness behind the softness of her exterior. She was more than what her father's court saw. One afternoon, as Victor worked on an aging engine, Althea approached him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Victor," she said, her voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something." Victor looked up from his tools, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What's on your mind, princess?" Althea shifted uncomfortably. "Why do you treat me like I'm not just a joke? Like I'm not." She trailed off, her face flushing slightly. "Like I'm not the emperor's burden." Victor paused, the words lingering in the air. He'd never thought about it that way. To him, Althea wasn't a burden. She was a person, someone trapped in a system that couldn't see her for what she truly was. He had no answer for her at that moment, but he knew one thing for sure. "Because you're not," he said quietly, his gaze steady. "You're not any of those things. You're a person, Althea. And no matter what anyone says, you deserve to be seen for who you are." The princess's eyes softened. She swallowed, looking down at her feet, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't what she'd expected to hear. For so long, she had been defined by her size, by her father's cruel expectations. No one had ever spoken to her like this, as if she were a person first and foremost. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Victor nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet understanding. "You're welcome." But as the days passed, Victor noticed something changing in Althea. Her posture, once hunched with the weight of her father's scorn, was slowly straightening. She began to stand taller, speak with more confidence, as if Victor's words had unlocked something inside her. It wasn't just about being accepted, it was about realizing that she had the right to take up space, to matter. In the quiet corners of the workshop, away from the emperor's cruel gaze, a subtle transformation was taking place. Victor and Althea's connection deepened, built on the unspoken understanding that no matter their roles in this empire, they both had something more to give than the world had ever allowed them to show. The work in the palace grew more urgent as the days went on. Victor had become accustomed to the constant hum of machinery and the almost oppressive silence that enveloped the palace halls. But amidst the technicalities of his work, Althea's quiet presence in the workshop had become a small, grounding comfort. They spoke less now, but the connection between them was tangible, felt in the small moments they shared. One afternoon, Victor was bent over an ancient control panel, his hands tangled in wires, when he felt a familiar, tentative gaze upon him. He didn't need to look up to know it was Althea. She had been coming by more frequently, though she never seemed to stay long. She was still finding her place in the shadows of her father's court. "Victor?" she asked quietly, interrupting his concentration. He looked up, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Princess, you're becoming a regular around here." She didn't smile back, her eyes distant. I've been thinking a lot lately." Victor set his tools down, giving her his full attention. There was something different in her tone, something heavier. "What's on your mind?" he asked, concern edging his voice. Althea hesitated, her hands folding tightly in front of her. "I don't know who I am anymore, not really." She glanced around the workshop, her gaze settling on the machines that hummed quietly in the background. "I've spent my whole life being told what I should be, what I should look like, how I should act. My father, he doesn't see me. He never has. To him, I'm just a tool, a bargaining chip." Victor's heart tightened at her words. He could hear the sadness in her voice, the weight of a lifetime of feeling invisible. But what struck him the most was the quiet strength that lingered beneath her words. She wasn't giving up. "Not yet. You're not just a tool," Victor said firmly, stepping closer to her. "You're more than what they see, more than what your father wants you to be. You're Althea." She met his gaze then, the vulnerability in her eyes raw and real. "I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know what I am beyond his shadow." Victor paused, searching for the right words. "You're a person, Althea. A person with your own heart. You don't have to hide behind your father's expectations, and you don't have to hide from yourself either." Her shoulders stiffened, the weight of his words sinking in. Victor didn't know what she would do with them, but he hoped she'd hear them. He hoped they would spark something inside her. I want to believe that," she said softly, almost to herself. Victor gave her a small smile. "Then believe it. You don't have to figure it all out today. Just start by being yourself. That's enough for now." Althea stood there in silence for a long moment, as if his words were finally starting to take root. Victor didn't push. Sometimes it was enough just to let the silence speak for them. And beneath the surface of their quiet moments, something was shifting, a small but powerful force, one that could change everything. Victor's hands moved mechanically as he worked, tightening bolts and adjusting panels in the quiet workshop. The palace was full of its usual hum, noble voices echoing from the hallways, distant sounds of courtly conversation, but Victor rarely paid attention. His world was here, among the machines, where the clanging of metal was a language he understood. Althea's presence had become a constant in this place, her visits growing more frequent, though her words fewer. She no longer hovered in the corner, content to remain invisible. Something had shifted in her. It was subtle at first, her back straighter, her eyes more direct, but Victor noticed it, even if no one else did. That afternoon, as he worked on an aging generator, he heard her footsteps approach. She stood in the doorway, watching him with a quiet intensity. Victor didn't pause his work, but he felt her gaze like a weight on his shoulders. "You've been quieter lately," he said, his voice low. Althea hesitated before speaking, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot." Victor set down his tools, giving her his full attention. "About what?" "I'm not sure anymore," she replied, looking down at her hands. "About everything. About who I am. I've spent so long being told what to be, what to look like, how to act. My father, the court, they've always had a place for me, but it's never been mine. I've never been allowed to be myself." Victor didn't speak right away. He knew better than to offer empty reassurances. Instead, he watched her, really watched her, as though seeing her for the first time. There was so much more to her than anyone realized: strength, intelligence, a will to survive beneath the layers of expectation and cruelty. "You're not just what they see, Althea," Victor said quietly. "You're more than a title, more than what anyone expects you to be. You're a person, and that means you get to decide who you are." Her eyes flickered up to meet his, and for the first time in days, she seemed to hold his gaze. "But how? How do I start being myself when everything I've been told is that I'm not enough?" Victor moved closer, his gaze soft but firm. "You start by choosing to be seen. You start by not hiding anymore. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to meet anyone else's expectations. Just be you, and let them see you for who you really are." Althea's expression faltered, the weight of his words settling deep within her. For a moment she looked lost, as if unsure of how to take the first step. But Victor saw something else behind her eyes, an ember of something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she said softly. Victor smiled, though it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a quiet, understanding smile. "You don't have to be strong all the time. You just need to believe that you are enough, and take it one step at a time." Althea stood still for a moment, processing his words. Finally, she nodded, a small but meaningful movement. "I think I want to try." Victor didn't respond. He didn't need to. In that simple decision, something inside Althea had begun to change. Victor had grown used to the quiet routine of his work. The hum of machines, the scent of oil and metal, and the occasional presence of Althea in the workshop were the only constants in his life. He had no illusions about the world outside these walls, but inside the workshop, it felt simpler, more real. Althea's visits had become longer, her confidence growing each time they spoke. She still carried the burden of her father's cruel expectations, but something in her had shifted. She was no longer the timid princess who hid behind her father's shadows. She was beginning to stand tall, to voice her thoughts. It was a small rebellion, but one that was more powerful than any grand gesture. That evening, as Victor was adjusting the settings on a power conduit, Althea entered the workshop, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with something he hadn't seen before: fear. "Victor," she said, her voice quieter than usual. He turned, sensing the change in her immediately. "What's wrong?" Althea hesitated, her gaze darting to the door, as if making sure no one was listening. "I've just had a meeting with my father," she said, her words tinged with frustration. "He knows what I've been doing. He knows that I'm changing." Victor's stomach tightened. He didn't need her to explain further. The Emperor's court wasn't a place where defiance was tolerated, especially not from his own flesh and blood. "What's he going to do?" Victor asked, his voice low. Althea's face hardened. "He's already decided. He's sending someone to keep an eye on me. Someone close. They're going to watch every move I make, report back to him. If I step out of line, I won't be safe." Victor felt a wave of anger rise in him, though he kept his voice steady. "Who?" Althea shook her head, frustration clouding her features. "I don't know yet, but I can feel it. They're closing in, Victor. I've become a threat to him." Her words hung in the air, a grim reality settling over both of them. Althea was no longer just a pawn in the Emperor's game. She had become a liability. And for the first time, Victor realized the full extent of the danger she was in. "You can't stay here, not if they're watching you," Victor said urgently. Althea's lips trembled, but she stood her ground. "I can't run from this forever, Victor. The court's eyes are everywhere. They'll find me. It's only a matter of time." Victor stepped toward her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "You don't have to face this alone. We'll figure something out." For a moment, Althea met his gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty and fear, but also something stronger, a quiet determination. "Thank you," she whispered. Victor nodded, the weight of the situation settling over him. There was no easy way out of this, no quick solution. But one thing was clear. Althea wasn't facing it alone anymore. The betrayal had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the Emperor would show just how far he was willing to go to keep his daughter in her place. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension, The once silent halls of the palace now felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Victor and Althea. She had become a target, not just of her father's cruelty, but of the political games being played by everyone around her. The whispers of betrayal were no longer just rumors, they were real, and the court was watching her every move. Althea had changed in subtle ways since their conversation in the workshop. Her back was straighter, her steps more deliberate. She still wore the mask of the obedient princess, but Victor could see the cracks in it. She was no longer content to hide in the shadows. The decision to take control of her life wasn't just a thought, it was becoming a necessity. One evening, as the light of the twin moons streamed through the palace windows, Althea came to the workshop again. This time, her expression was different, less uncertain, more resolved. Victor, who had been tightening the joints of a power panel, paused and looked up. "You've been quiet," he said softly, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's on your mind?" Althea stood there for a long moment, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a nearby table. "I'm not sure how much longer I can stay here, Victor," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what she was about to say. "I've become a problem to my father, and he's not going to let me go without a fight." Victor's stomach tightened. He had been dreading this conversation. He had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud made it real. "You're not a problem," he said quietly, his voice firm. "You're a person. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not what they want you to be." Althea gave him a small, sad smile. "I know, but I can't change how they see me. And now, with the court watching, I can't stay here anymore." Victor felt a surge of urgency. "Then we need to get you out of here. You can't stay in a place where you're constantly at risk." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "But where will I go, Victor? The entire empire is against me. I don't know if there's a place where I can be safe." Victor stepped closer to her, his heart racing. "You don't have to figure that out alone. I'll help you." Althea's eyes softened, but there was something else there now, something Victor hadn't seen before. A quiet strength, the first true sign of the woman she was becoming. "I know you will," she said, her voice resolute. "But this isn't just about me anymore. I have to make a choice. Stay and fight, or leave everything behind and run." Victor nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "The choice is yours, Althea. But whatever you choose, you won't face it alone. I'll stand by you." Althea took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling over her. After a long pause, she spoke. "Then I choose to fight. I'm done hiding." In that moment, Victor saw the Princess Althea could become the one who wouldn't just bow to fate, but who would shape it with her own hands. The decision to fight had been made. Althea's resolve was stronger than ever, but the road ahead was fraught with danger. The palace, once a place of security, now felt like a prison, each shadow a potential threat. The court was watching her every move, and Victor knew it was only a matter of time before they would strike. The days passed in a blur of whispers and subtle movements. Althea spent less time in the public areas of the palace, her presence becoming more scarce. She kept to the shadows, moving through the halls with an almost eerie silence. Victor had seen this side of her before, when she had been hiding, when she had been invisible. But now, it was different. She was moving with purpose, eyes sharp, every step calculated. One evening, as Victor finished a routine repair in the workshop, he heard footsteps approach. He turned, expecting to see Althea, but instead, a cloaked figure stepped into the doorway. Victor's hand instinctively reached for a tool, his body tensing, but the figure raised a hand in peace. "Relax," the figure said, a voice muffled by the cloak. "I'm not here to fight." Victor narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The figure lowered the hood, revealing a young woman with sharp, calculating eyes. "I'm a friend," she said. "A friend of the princess." Victor didn't trust her. The court was full of spies, and he had no way of knowing whether this was one of them, sent to track Althea's movements. "What do you want?" The woman stepped forward, glancing over her shoulder to ensure they weren't being watched. "Althea is in danger. The Emperor has already put a bounty on her head. If she stays here much longer, they'll kill her." The words hit Victor like a punch to the gut. He had known the risks, but hearing them spoken so plainly made it all too real. "Who are you working for?" "I'm not working for anyone," the woman said, her voice quiet but urgent. "I'm here to help. I have a way to get her out of the palace before it's too late, but she has to trust me." Victor didn't like the sound of this. Althea's safety meant everything to him, but trusting an unknown ally was a dangerous gamble. "And why should I trust you?" The woman met his gaze, her eyes unflinching. "Because I'm the only one who can get her out of here alive. The rest of the court is closing in, and your princess is running out of time." Victor's heart raced as the weight of her words settled in. He thought of Althea, of the quiet strength she had shown, of the woman she was becoming. She couldn't stay here. He couldn't let her die in this palace, at the hands of her own family. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. "Follow me. It's the only chance she has." The palace was deathly quiet as Victor and Althea crept through the darkened hallways, their footsteps muffled against the cold stone floors. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should, every sound amplified. The weight of what they were doing pressed heavily on Victor's chest. Escape was no longer a distant thought, it was now a desperate need. They reached a narrow hallway near the rear of the palace, a place Althea had never noticed before. The mysterious woman, their would-be ally, had left them with only a few instructions. "Follow the hidden path, trust no one, and get out. Stay close," Victor whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Althea nodded, her face pale in the dim light. The palace, once a place of regal comfort, now felt like a labyrinth of danger. Her father's reach had never felt as real as it did now. With every step, Althea could almost hear the echoes of her father's voice, reminding her of her place. "You all right?" Victor asked, glancing at her. She gave him a small, strained smile. "I'm not sure anymore, but I'm ready." Victor could see the resolve in her eyes, the same fire that had sparked when she first decided to take control of her own life. She wasn't the same woman who had hesitated, unsure of her place. She was ready for whatever came next. The woman had left them with a small, concealed door near the back of the palace. Once they passed through, they would enter the underground tunnels that ran beneath the empire, a network of passages that few knew about. The only way out was forward. They reached the door. Victor placed a hand on the cold iron handle, hesitated, and then pushed it open, revealing a dark passage beyond. The air was musty and stale, but it was a sanctuary from the watchful eyes of the court. "After you," Victor said, his voice laced with a mix of caution and urgency. Althea stepped through first, her movements deliberate. She was no longer the delicate princess of the palace. She was a woman who had made a choice. They couldn't go back. The sound of the door shutting behind them was the final seal. There was no going back to the life they had known. The tunnels stretched out before them, dark and winding, the only sound their footsteps and the distant drip of water. It felt like they were descending into another world, one that was filled with danger, but also freedom. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was theirs to walk. Althea glanced back at Victor, her expression serious. "What if they find us?" "We keep moving," Victor replied, his voice steady. "We don't stop, we don't look back." And with that, they pressed forward, their only choice to keep going, to leave the palace and the life they had known behind. The tunnels were suffocating, the air thick with dust and the scent of old stone. Every footstep echoed in the darkness, amplifying the silence around them. Victor led the way, his heart pounding with every step, while Althea followed closely behind, her movements quiet but purposeful. They had left the palace behind, but they weren't free yet. The city above was still a prison, its walls filled with the reach of the emperor's influence. Althea's father was not a man who took betrayal lightly, and Victor knew that the moment Althea's absence was noticed, the hunt would begin. He could almost feel the eyes of the palace, invisible but ever-present, watching every move they made. Althea's hand brushed his arm, pulling Victor from his thoughts. "How much further?" she asked, her voice laced with fatigue. "Not far," Victor replied, glancing back. "We just need to get through these tunnels. Once we're outside the city walls, we'll have a chance." Althea nodded, but there was a shadow in her eyes, an uncertainty that Victor couldn't ignore. She had made the decision to escape, to fight back against her father's control, but the weight of what that meant was settling in. "Victor," she said after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I can do this? Do you think I can take on everything that's coming?" Victor stopped, turning to face her. The look in her eyes was vulnerable, something he hadn't seen in her before. The girl who had once been full of uncertainty, now questioning whether she was strong enough to face what lay ahead. "You're stronger than you think, Althea," he said firmly. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going, one step at a time." Althea's eyes softened, and for a moment, Victor saw the princess who had been hidden behind walls of fear and expectation. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was standing tall, ready to face the fight that awaited her. They continued their journey through the dark corridors, the tunnel walls narrowing as they moved deeper beneath the city. The sounds of the outside world, the bustle of the streets, the calls of the merchants grew faint, replaced by the rush of their footsteps. Suddenly, the sound of distant shouting reached their ears. Victor froze, instinctively reaching for Althea, his heart hammering. "They're looking for us," Victor said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move faster." Althea's face hardened. She had no illusions about what would happen if they were caught. Her father would stop at nothing to bring her back. They had no time to waste. They quickened their pace, moving through the darkness like shadows, their only goal to reach the exit. But Victor couldn't shake the feeling that the Emperor's wrath had already begun. His forces would be closing in soon, and the cost of failure would be high. As they reached the tunnel's end, the sound of pursuit grew louder. They were running out of time. The entrance to the tunnels loomed ahead, a jagged crack in the stone wall that led to the outside world. The city's walls were still far, but the fresh air from the cracks in the earth felt like freedom itself. Victor's heart raced as he moved swiftly toward the exit, but something in his gut told him that the worst was far from over. Althea followed close behind, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her eyes were fixed on the distant opening, but Victor could see the strain in her face. The weight of the decision to leave, to challenge her father's reign, was beginning to take its toll. The princess who had once been invisible was now a fugitive, and that kind of life was never easy. "We're almost there," Victor murmured, his voice filled with urgency. He reached the entrance and pulled aside a loose stone to reveal a narrow passage leading outside. "Stay close. We need to move fast." Althea nodded, her face pale but determined. She wasn't the frightened girl she had once been. Her resolve had solidified during their flight, and now she was driven by something stronger than purpose. But Victor could still see the flickers of doubt in her eyes, the weight of what she had left behind and what lay ahead. They stepped into the night air, the cold breeze biting at their skin. The city stretched out before them, quiet and unaware of the storm brewing within its walls. The sounds of the night, the calls of distant creatures, the rustle of trees in the wind felt foreign to Althea. She had spent her entire life within the palace, her movements controlled, her world small. Now, she was stepping into something far larger, a world that would require her to fight for every inch of space she took. "I never thought I'd be out here," Althea said quietly, her voice distant. She took a deep breath, looking up at the stars above them, so vast and unfamiliar. "I thought I was meant to be a princess, a symbol." Victor's gaze softened as he watched her, understanding the weight of her words. "You are more than a symbol. You're a person, Althea, and that's all that matters now." She turned to him, a flicker of gratitude passing over her face. "I don't know if I'm ready for what comes next. I don't know how to fight like this." Victor met her gaze firmly. "You don't need to know how to fight like anyone else. You just need to be yourself. That's the strength you need." Althea's lips curled into a small, determined smile. It was the first genuine smile Victor had seen on her since their escape had begun. There was something different in her eyes now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I've been hiding for too long. It's time to stand up for what I believe in." Victor nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "And I'll be right beside you. Whatever happens, we face it together." Together, they stepped away from the passage, moving further into the unknown. The night was dark, but their path, uncertain as it was now their own. There was no turning back. The night felt endless as Victor and Althea moved through the dense forest, the city walls slowly fading behind them. The quiet hum of the world around them was a stark contrast to the noise in their heads. The air was cooler out here, away from the heat of the palace, but the weight of what they were doing pressed down on them both. Every step they took felt like it could be their last, every rustle in the trees a potential threat. The palace would be hunting them by now. It wasn't just the emperor's guards they had to worry about, it was the eyes of the entire court. Everyone would want Althea back. They would want to squash this rebellion before it could grow. "How much further?" Althea asked, her voice strained. She was keeping up, but Victor could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The physical toll of their flight was nothing compared to the emotional weight she carried. "Not much longer," Victor replied, though his own body ached. The forest was dense and unfamiliar. The only thing guiding them was the knowledge that the farther they went, the harder it would be for the emperor to track them. But the fear lingered. They weren't safe yet. They came to a small clearing, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. Victor paused, scanning the area. The quiet felt too still. His instincts told him something was wrong. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice low but urgent. He didn't know how, but he could feel it. The air had changed, the tension in the night thicker than before. Althea stepped beside him, her eyes wide with fear, but also something else, determination. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice steady. "We fight." Victor met her gaze, his heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had come so far, but the reality of what they were up against had hit her like a tidal wave. The Emperor's forces would be relentless. The rebellion they faced was not one of swords and armor alone, but of ideals, of power, of life and death. "We don't fight unless we have to," Victor replied, though his tone was tight with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He had sworn to protect her, but he wasn't sure if they could outrun the Empire forever. Then, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness of the night. At first, it was just one, then two, then several more, each heavier than the last. The Emperor's forces had found them. Victor pulled Althea behind a nearby tree, his heart racing. "Stay quiet, stay hidden." Althea gripped his arm, her fingers cold with fear, but her eyes were filled with resolve. She wasn't the frightened princess anymore. She was a leader, and this moment, right here, would be where she chose to stand tall. The soldiers emerged from the shadows, their eyes scanning the area. Victor held his breath. The moment was coming, and with it, a choice. Althea stepped forward, her voice firm. "We don't run anymore." The soldiers froze as Althea stepped into the clearing, her posture unyielding, her gaze fixed ahead with a quiet, unspoken determination. Victor's heart raced, his body poised to act, but he stood still, watching Althea. She wasn't the frightened princess who had fled the palace anymore. She had become something else, a leader, a fighter, someone who would no longer be silenced. "You're making a mistake," one of the soldiers called out, his voice cold, but with an underlying hint of uncertainty. "Your father won't forgive this." Althea didn't flinch, her eyes steely. "I don't care." Victor's pulse quickened. He knew what was at stake, what the Emperor would do if they were caught. But Althea had made her choice. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer anyone's pawn. The soldiers, cloaked in their dark armor, stepped forward. Their eyes shifted from Victor to Althea, calculating their next move. Victor took a small step forward, positioning himself between them, his hand instinctively hovering near the hidden blade he carried. "No one touches her," he said, his voice low and steady. The soldiers halted, surprised by the defiance in Victor's voice. They had underestimated him. He was just a mechanic, an insignificant part of the palace machinery. But in this moment, Victor felt the weight of everything he had fought for. He would protect Althea, no matter what. "We have orders to bring her back alive," the lead soldier said, his tone dismissive. "But you won't leave here unscathed." Althea stepped forward, not out of fear, but with a strength Victor had come to admire. "I'm not going back, and neither is he." Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable power behind it. She wasn't just speaking to the soldiers, she was speaking to herself, to Victor, and to anyone who had ever doubted her. Victor glanced at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she chose to stand tall. The soldiers hesitated, clearly not expecting this kind of resistance. They exchanged nervous glances, uncertainty creeping in. Althea's defiance had broken something inside them. the illusion of control shattered by her simple words. "I won't run anymore," Althea continued, her voice stronger than before. "I've had enough of being afraid. I choose to fight." With that, Victor felt the shift in the air. It was subtle, but undeniable. The soldiers, unsure of what to do next, slowly lowered their weapons. The tension in the air hung thick, but the fight was over before it had begun. Althea had won the moment with nothing more than her will. The lead soldier, defeated, nodded to his men. "We won't pursue further. She's not worth the trouble." Althea didn't move as they backed away, the clearing still, save for the rising wind. Victor stepped beside her, his heart still racing but a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's done," he said quietly. Althea met his gaze, her face resolute. "No, it's just beginning." As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, casting warm golden hues over the world, they stood together ready for the future, whatever it might bring.